The views and opinions expressed on this platform are of me, myself, and I, not any agency I'm affiliated with. So please do not take what I say personally. Today, I have the distinct honor, and I will say this is going to be my favorite episode. I have the distinct honor of having my dad with me today. This is going to be Greg Fairbanks, my dad. Feels weird to say his full name out loud. He is a retired lieutenant with the Baton Rouge City Police Department. He served as a police officer, an investigator/detective, a supervisor, and a chaplain. As I said, he is retired, so now he resides in Casper, Wyoming as a pastor. Dad, it's good to have you.
It's good to be here, Alexis.
See, I said dad, not Greg.
And you should.
So, Dad, if you want to give a little intro about yourself, tell the people who you are, what you stand for, the areas that you've worked in, go ahead, have a free reign with it.
Well, Alexis, before I go into all that, I would say that it is an honor to be on your podcast. I feel honored to be invited to speak, and if we can shed a little bit of light of law enforcement as well as better relationship with paramedics, first responders, with anything we can do or I can do to help make that connection, I'll be glad to do it. But I don't really have anything grandiose or spectacular to bring to the table. It's just a lot of experience. Was with Baton Rouge City Police for 28 years, started as a police officer, went into investigations a little early into my career, and then after 19 years of investigations, went back out into uniform patrol, serving as a supervisor, and then retired as a lieutenant. So it's kind of a broad base of experience, but it was an incredible journey nonetheless.
So, I know I've asked before, but it's been a minute. Why did you become a police officer all those eons ago?
Well, I was inspired by my dad, who retired with Louisiana State Police. Of course, watching my father serve in law enforcement for 32 years. That was my inspiration. Of course, I went to college and graduated with a degree in criminal justice, which is why I encourage you and your older brother to get a professional degree and not a criminal justice degree. But that was probably the impetus to get me into law enforcement. It's one of those things where it's in your blood. I mean, I know my dad, he served for many, many years. I enjoyed my service as well. It's kind of like ministry. It's something you're called into, and it's in your blood. So it was for me, it was a natural fit.
I just remember whenever I told you I wanted to be an EMT and you weren't disappointed, but I could just see it in your face that you were like, Lex, you have no clue what you're getting into. And I absolutely had no clue what I was getting into. So, um, so go ahead and tell me about the reality of being a police officer because, like, we'll see on TV of Chicago PD or like all the show Cops and stuff like that that you hate that I watch sometimes. But we see that or like, we see the things where cops are being made fun of. We'll just, go ahead and lay that out. That's why Dad never really got donuts because of the stigma. Or, we'll see like if you should ever get pulled over, not that I have, but we only see one side of law enforcement. So like what would you say are the background things that like the lay person doesn't see?
Well, I think what most people understand is it's a job that can go from almost 0 to 100 within seconds, in milliseconds. And so, which is why I enjoy the career because, at times it can be a little bit mundane, but at times it can be very intriguing and there can be some adrenaline dumps. And so it's, every day is a new day. I think one thing in regards specifically to your question, law enforcement has changed quite a bit in the last 30 years. Um, what it has transformed or morphed into, or how the landscape has changed, is a little bit disheartening and concerning because I think the demands and the pressures on law enforcement is almost overwhelming. And then, of course, you couple that with the lack of respect across the board in most segments of society, not all, but most. And then media scrutiny. It's very daunting as a field, And that's why I think most people don't survive it for 30 years or 25 years. It's because it's changed so much and the demands are so high. In a lot of cases, the pay is so low. But nonetheless, for me, it was a very rewarding career. I would like to say that it's going to head for better direction or better changes. Only time's going to tell. And it's typically a pendulum that will swing. Sometimes it's just swinging very far left at this point in time. Hopefully, it will swing back to the right. But I know for the realities of what most people, their preconceived notions, sitting at a coffee shop or a donut stand, it's not quite like that. You've got to be able to take a lot of lip. You've got to be able to be patient, know when to act, know when not to act, know when to show restraint, know when to use discretion, and basically, at the end of the day, your primary concern is I'm going to make it home safe to my family. And so it is certainly not like Hollywood portrays it, but then again, there's some aspects that's not quite as glamorous as Hollywood would portray it. So it's kind of a happy medium. You'll have highs, lows, like any other career. There's some days where you've got a lot of work to do and a little time to do it, but you just push through it and make it happen.
So, kind of on that high note that you talked about a second ago, when would you say that you would leave shift and think to yourself, like, man, this was a good shift or this was a good day because blank?
Well, it really depends on which area you're working in. In uniform patrol, uh, on the line personnel level as a first responder, a uniform patrol officer, a good day is going out, taking care of calls, answering calls for service, making arrest when necessary, and basically finishing with a good, clear conscience that I did my best. In investigations, a good day is, when especially you make an arrest, you get a confession, you clear some cases, especially if it's a felony case that carries a lot of weight. I've left courtroom testimony and feeling very successful in terms of, a good day in court. So it really depends on which area of law enforcement you're working in. And I think also the municipality or who you're working for also can impact, that satisfaction of feeling like you've made a difference or had a good day. So there's really no, I think, straight up answer to your question, but it all comes back to your work ethic and how well you put yourself into your job, giving it due diligence, doing your best, and serving others, doing what a law enforcement professional should do, and that's be in service to the community and to be that line of defense.
Very good. Wow. Kind of taking a spin and going into the EMS side of working alongside police departments and the police officers of the field. What do you think could be put in place to better help the relationship between EMS and the police department in general? Like, because we have one job on scene, you guys have a different job. No matter what the call is, like, we have two different responsibilities. Because at the core of like who we are, at the end of the day, you guys are mainly there to protect, but we also both serve, if that makes sense. We don't necessarily protect so much unless it's like patient information. But just kind of like we work together, but I feel like there's, I don't know, because of the differences between our jobs and stuff. So, is there anything to kind of bridge that gap between the police department and EMS, or is it just kind of we just work alongside each other and figure it out along the way?
Well, I think cross training would probably be one area that could be improved on both sides of the aisle. I don't know of any cross training. I know with Baton Rouge Police Department, there's no cross training with EMS, and I think that would give each agency a better perspective of how what their individual roles are. I know for us, we come on scene for a crash, and there's bodies on the pavement. We do our best to render aid, but yet there's other responsibilities we have. So we're glad to see EMS roll up and take care of business. But I think cross training is probably a need that would maybe help bridge the gap. I think each agency having a much better defined role to where police understand exactly what the role is of EMS versus EMS understanding exactly what the role of law enforcement is. I think if there's a much more defined, clearer picture of what the roles are, it might make better working relationships. But I know in Baton Rouge, we worked well alongside EMS, and um, we consider ourselves partners. And when they're on the scene, I don't look at them as underlings. They didn't look at us as underlings. So we worked together as a team to accomplish the same goal, and it usually boded very well with both agencies. But I will say this: a lot of times, just like with our agency, you've got some officers uh, that are garbage. They're just there for a paycheck, and because it's a big enough agency where you're going to hire some less than desirables, some deplorables get hired, and in the end, that it's a bad reflection on all of us, but it's not all of us. And so I think and the same thing goes with EMS. There's sometimes people get hired because of who they know, and not because of what they know or their qualifications. So I've seen some of the EMS personnel seem to feel like they might be walking at a different plane or level, and it's no big deal. But I think the understanding that if we could all have a much more defined role and understand that we have the same objective and the same purpose and mission, as you said earlier, it would probably make for better working relationships, along with cross training and maybe even some ride-alongs. That would um, I think that would also kind of help give a clearer picture of what each agency does and what roles they serve.
I never thought about the cross training, which is exactly like I think that would help a lot with us knowing, like you said, with EMS knowing kind of the role and stuff like that, and then what happens before EMS gets there, and then also vice versa, having the police department or having police officers ride with us and see what happens when we get on scene, or like sometimes whenever they're not able to respond, how much of a strain it kind of puts on us. So, yeah, absolutely. But also keeping that attitude at the end of the day of we're both here for each other and the person that we're at that call for. Because, like you're saying, the ones who walk around, they think they're better than the police. Like, they need to take a back seat because as soon as you need them, guess who's not better than the police department? That person.
Mm.
Because when you need them, you needed them 5 minutes ago, and oops, kind of like you said earlier, things just change from 0 to 100 in like a millisecond. Kind of like what you're saying with the cross training, I think it would be vital. Because there are some areas that I feel like, and again, I've never done a ride along with the police department besides the times I'd sit in your car, which doesn't really count. But
Not
not even
hardly.
close.
Not hardly.
But I feel like there's some training that could be given to police officers, and this isn't putting any specific agency down, but like when we get on scene and CPR's already started, thank God. Like that makes a difference. And then if the officer is still willing to continue CPR as we're doing stuff, it makes such a difference. Like I personally take a moment and look at like whatever their ID or like the name on their uniform, whatever it is, just because like sometimes I'll make a call to whoever the chief is or their supervisor and be like, hey, you got a solid officer, please like send due regards because we appreciate them so much. But then there are times when we get on scene and um basically there's no reason that Narcan should have been given, but it's given anyways, like for a diabetic. And that kind of puts a strain on us. I mean, it doesn't do anything wrong for the patient, but like just because you have the thing doesn't mean it was needed in that moment. And sometimes it's a matter of the officer's doing his best and he doesn't know better. But, there are times whenever we get on scene and like you guys carry tourniquets, which are life saving interventions, and they're great, but if they don't need a tourniquet, it's kind of prolonged like patient endangerment in a way. Um, there are times when officers could benefit from learning how to give like an EpiPen or something like that. So while you guys have like some of the tips and tricks that we need y'all to have if y'all get there before us, I feel like there's still a lack of education that could be provided for those officers, whether it's through cross training or
Well, let me just say first of all that there is some basic first responder training given for CPR, life support, and then that goes back to, when an officer gets on scene, if they see the need, they should act. Um, there is a reluctance in law enforcement because the level of training is much more basic for us as opposed to paramedics, EMTs. So there's reluctance in the sense of, well, I should do this, I think I should do that, but it's not something we do every day. And so, and then unfortunately, a lot of people will categorize that, well, that's an EMS thing. That's for them to take care of. But it goes back to training. Training is important. I think if training was in that area was increased or a little more, I guess, a little more adequate, I think it would probably make a difference. But at the end of the day, a lot of it's going to come back to the mindset of the officer. When he gets on scene, he's got a choice: either react and render aid, or just stand by with the hands in their pockets, thinking that EMS is going to take care of it. It's my conscience. I'm going to do what I can to, thank God I've never had to shoot anybody, but I know there's been situations where an officer in a deadly force encounter had to shoot a subject and then go immediately and start doing chest compressions to keep them alive. And so, that's the kind of mentality I wish most officers would have, because yeah, that was a perpetrator. He deserved to be shot, but at the end of the day, preserving life is more important. Yeah, I don't think tourniquets for us was a new thing. It's really something we've been trained in for in services in the last maybe 5-7 years, and I could see where they're very vital. They've been introduced before, but never really any hands-on training. It's just these are areas of law enforcement. Narcan, EpiPens. These are areas that law enforcement has been reluctant to step into because just because not just liability, but it's just areas that we're not heavily trained in. And it's I guess a lot of the mindset is we just defer to the experts, let the experts take care of it, which is you all. Um, but when it comes to life saving measures, you know, I think you act and you do the best you can with what you have, and just I guess the Good Samaritan laws would hopefully take care of any insufficiencies.
right. And like I wasn't pointing fingers, it's stuff that I think about on a pretty consistent basis, but kind of like you said, just that it's not the lack of want of education, it's the lack of provided education, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Speaking of questions I think about, I know this is one that myself and a lot of other people have. Sometimes PD will ask us to transport a psychiatric patient, and then sometimes they don't. So, like with the agency I'm at right now, unless the person has ingested something or they're not really fully with it or they have harmed themselves, we don't transport them. The officers do. And it's a kind of a win-win for both of us because typically if the officer's transporting, they're going to end up at the hospital anyways, just because it's, an open investigation, whatever it is, or if there's criminal intent, blah, 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 things that are above my pay grade. But if we're transporting, it's because, okay, more so than they need the further steps in their psychiatric care, they need medical attention for this thing. So is there like a specific line of whenever we're asked to transport or when y'all are? Because, like I told you earlier, there was one time an officer requested us to transport a psychiatric patient who had self harmed. And we get there, and she did it like 2 days ago. And he still wanted us to transport. And she was totally fine. Is that a liability thing, or is that just kind of he didn't want to deal with it? Or,
Well, I think when you say there's two key words in the question that you're asking. One is patient, the other one is hospital. And most officers are going to have the mindset, well, that's an EMS thing because it's a patient. I deal with perpetrators and complainants, not patients. And hospital is something that a van should give a ride to, not the back of a police car. So that's kind of I guess the prevalent mindset. And I know policies dictate what how that is going to shake out. I know with BRPD, it's the policy morphed to where if EMS is not available, you transport. And so, but the first line of defense is EMS, um, because of those two key words: patient, hospital. I know EMS in Baton Rouge. It's my last few years with BRPD. They were understaffed, and there were times when we had no option. We had to transport. And at the end of the day, it's not a big deal. But there's times we're short. I know in Baton Rouge, especially first and fourth precincts, most officers are simply going call to call to call to call to call. And so our resources are oftentimes pretty thin. And having, good officers will say if we're told by communications that EMS is tied up, it may be 30 minutes, they'll put the patient in the back of the car and give them the free ride that most of them are just looking for. There's some legitimate patients, but there's some that just want a free ride to the hospital because it's cold and they want to get out of the elements. Um,
Those are very, very, very true facts.
right, but that's not us. We're just going to give the ride and let the doctors make that determination. But it's based upon resources. I know for us, there's times when we're stretched so thin. If we could get EMS to transport and EMS is available, we'd call for them. But at the end of the day, it comes back to the individual officer and his level of professionalism and how well he works, quote unquote, with a team. Because we're all a team and we're all, working together, and we try to, what comes around will go around. And typically you keep punting to EMS and trying to put the ball in their court when you could easily do the job, and especially when they're tied up, it's going to come back around, and you'll get your day as well.
Kind of want to go off of something you said about when y'all are tied up and stuff like that. There have been calls as far as like scene safety, and whenever we ask you guys to come secure a scene for us, I mean, like 8, 9 times out of 10, there's no request just because it's kind of this automatic, like, oh, if it sounds shady, we're not just going to throw EMS in there and make more victims, whatever. They'll already have the police either on the way or at the scene, whatever. But then there are times whenever, like, a couple instances, we're reading the notes from the dispatcher, and it's stuff that, like, one time it was this guy had a knife and was going after his wife or somebody like that. And the wife got the knife away, and the police officer was still an exit away on the interstate and said that it's fine if EMS goes ahead and goes in. And I looked at my partner for that day and I was like, is this guy serious? Like, I'm not just gonna go in there with no body armor or taser or gun or, like, I have a pair of scissors in my pocket. That's all I have to protect me. So there's instances like that. And then the one time I think I told you about where I got a gun pulled out on me on a scene after the officer had said, yeah, the patients, we already patted them down. They're good to go. So, like, is there a time when, like, I don't know how to word this other than saying, like, whenever y'all roll your eyes and y'all are like, we're going call to call, like you said. I mean, kind of like we are sometimes too, but like the officers are thinking like we're going call to call, and now we have to go secure this scene. Y'all roll y'all's eyes, or is it kind of like this thing of, we're gonna go anyways. We'll just go secure it real quick and call it a day.
Well, I know with EBR EMS, they will stage, and rightly so, and should stage until the scene is safe. Just as you stated earlier, you don't have a vest, you don't have a gun, you don't have a taser. Of course, unfortunately, a lot of times if you don't have a good communications officer or a good call taker, a lot of facts and information is overlooked. And sometimes EMS will step onto a scene that they should not have stepped into. And I think that's where experience will tell a good paramedic, hey, let's back off until PD gets on scene. That goes back to experience, training. You just got to know when to step back and say, wait, this scene is not safe. And God forbid an officer has any reluctance to go and make the scene safe, because that's what we're supposed to do. I would be disappointed as a sergeant or lieutenant if I even got wind that there was one of our officers that was griping or complaining about making the scene safe, because we know through experience EMS is going to stage and they're going to hold back until the scene is safe, because they're not prepared for a confrontation, or they're not trained for it, they're not equipped for it. And so I think it's just a poor reflection on law enforcement if anybody quote unquote rolls their eyes because they have to go and make a scene safe. Um, I think they need to check while they're doing their job. And it goes back to what I said earlier. Some people are garbage, and that's just the that's just the nature of the beast. I've said before, you get what you pay for, and unfortunately, law enforcement doesn't pay as well as it should, and we get more than our fair share of deplorables that have a gun and a badge and should not be employed. But you know, I think for our agency, there's been occasions where we have to respond to a call that EMS went directly to that law enforcement was not dispatched to, but they called for assistance. Dispatch would code that as a 633, meaning that there's an EMS personnel needing assistance. And for our agency, that's like a fellow officer that needs help. We're coming and we're coming in hot. That's the way we treated it. I think probably in rural areas, where the level of professionalism even goes further down because the pay goes down. My hat's off to paramedics that work in some of the, podunk areas of Louisiana and other areas where you've got some really incompetent police officers that are trying to do a job of law enforcement that they're not trained. It's just a bad combination. But in Baton Rouge, that's our primary responsibility is scene safety. Once again, I've never encountered anybody that was reluctant to go in and make the scene safe. Now, some didn't do their job as well as others, and God forbid something, a patient has a weapon before, after EMS is on scene. That should not happen, but sometimes it does. That's where a good supervisor will address that with the line officer and make sure that doesn't happen again.
In my instance, it didn't. That officer got fired. So found that
Wow.
out after.
Yeah,
Um,
and rightly so.
it wasn't the first instance where that officer specifically had said, "Oh yeah, we checked him," and never did. And there wasn't like maybe 2 weeks before, like literally the patient, this elder little pawpaw, said, "Well, let me down my piece real quick before I go with y'all." And wouldn't you know, 2 weeks later that happened. So
Mm.
she got canned. And I wasn't even mad because my catchphrase, especially after that, is always, "I'm just trying to get home at the end of this shift, me." I want to touch on a phrase that I've heard on multiple scenes before that I just don't understand. Quote, "You either go with EMS or you go to jail," end quote. Which not only implies that either one of us are going to be kidnapping that patient, but it also implies that, like, if I go with EMS, I don't have to go to jail. Which, if you're there, like the police officer's there, and something has happened, they're gonna you don't get out of going to jail because you go to the hospital. And typically the officer has to sit the whole time. Anyway, I just didn't understand that. And not only does it like kind of create that false illusion of what's going to happen, but it just puts a strain on us as the, like, if they go with us, um it kind of puts a wedge in between our relationship and rapport that we have with that patient from then on out. And at the end of the day, it also, like, not only are you hiding the truth from that patient, but then it makes us look like we don't even care. Like, we don't care where you go. I don't care what happens to you, but you got to go with somebody. You can't just stay here. Like, have you ever said that? Or do you
No,
know?
no. That's if somebody, number one, if there's probable cause for an arrest, whether EMS is involved or not, you have to make an arrest. So if you're going to bring in to the equation taking a ride to the parish prison, that means you got charges. And if you got charges, you go make your arrest, do your paperwork, and then take the prisoner to the local hospital and get them cleared, and then book them into parish prison. I don't really quite understand why an officer would even tell somebody either you go with EMS or you're going to jail. That it makes no sense. Because at the end of the day, if you have probable cause, in that moment, if you have enough sufficient evidence for an arrest, then you have to make the arrest. It's not optional. And so you're derelict in your duties if you don't make the arrest. So I don't understand what mentality there is to tell an individual, hey, you're either going to take a ride with them or you're going to go to jail. I don't, I don't quite understand how that scenario would even play out because if there's the threat of jail, that means somebody's committed a crime, which means they're going to have to be booked into prison unless it's a misdemeanor. So, and once again, I think that probably, if I had to guess, Alexis came from experience in some very rural areas where officers just didn't have a quite full understanding of what their job entailed, and should not happen. It should not be something that anybody should experience as a paramedic or even as an individual, as a citizen.
It never really made much sense to us either, but I mean, it was what it was. So that's what I kind of figured I'd throw that in because I'm like, who says that kind of thing? And who, like you said, if they're implying that they're going to jail, like obviously something was charged, so they're gonna go there anyways. You don't get a get out of jail free card by going to the hospital,
No,
friends.
no.
And I think it was situations where like the patient was drunk and they didn't want to go or whatever, or they overdosed, and that's happened a couple of times. But it's like they can't get arrested because they overdosed. Like it, I don't know. They were weird situations. It never made sense to me. I didn't know if there was some kind of secret sauce in the police department.
No, it's probably an officer that was, as I like to say, a rock with lips that should not be working in law enforcement in the first place.
One of the deplorables.
Yes.
All right. And I'll get to the standard questions that I ask every interview. I've changed them a little bit different for you, but for you, what helped prevent burnout in all of your vast experience and years of law enforcement?
Well, first of all, you've got to learn how to take the hat off. When you leave your shift and you finish your tour of duty, or at the end of your day, you've got to learn to take the hat off and leave the job at the job. I've worked with some officers that would sleep with a radio by their bed. I don't get it. I enjoy what I do, and I was glad to do it, but at the end of the day, I'm done. And so I learned early how to take the hat off. I know for me individually, having a refuge, i.e., a church to where I can go and worship and basically kind of squeeze all of the mess out that you see and that you experience. That for me was what helped me to come back each week after a day of worship, do my job all over again, and do it well, and leave the past in the past and go and face another day. I know as a chaplain, one phrase that we would use as chaplains is, as in law enforcement as well as as a paramedic and EMS, you're gonna go from call to call to call to call, and it's like a sponge that's gonna take in water. Every call's water, and as you go from call to call, the sponge eventually gets full, and at some point, you need to squeeze your sponge. And so, and for others, it's various avenues or self help or self care that can do that. For me, it was our going to church and worshiping God and serving Jesus Christ. That was the way I squeezed my sponge, and learning how to take the hat off. So that was the balance that I found that worked well. Of course, sprinkle in family, other things that would bring entertainment and satisfaction. It's a matter of just being balanced and not being that guy that's all they do is eat, sleep, and breathe. EMS or law enforcement. That's a vocation. It's a career. You don't live to be a cop. That's just a means to an end, and it's not something that defines who you are. That's why in retirement, some officers when they retire, they're within 5 years they're in a grave. That's because they had no other job out. They felt like their purpose is over. after they finish a career of law enforcement, and because that's all they were was law enforcement. And so it's really sad. It's really sad to see that. And I get it. The cause is great, and it's something to throw yourself into and enjoy, but it doesn't define who you are. And I think having an avenue to release yourself of all of that, squeeze your sponge, so to speak, that's important. And it's important for longevity. It's important for good mental health and, keeping things in perspective and learning how to take off the hat. Uh, for me, it was the balance that worked. Everyone's wired a little bit differently. Some like hobbies and fishing, hunting. My hobby was building houses. I like making money. And so I would go out and build houses and make money. So, you know, uh, I think comes back to balance and moderation and knowing how to take off the hat.
You couldn't see it, but I was laughing because my dad's hobby was an entire second career that he held. That is one thing I feel like I have gained from my dad is not only a good work ethic of I work and I work hard and I enjoy my work and I do it a lot, but also that ability to disconnect. And I think I picked up from you subconsciously that like when I go home, like the job stops. And even through paramedic school, I wouldn't study at home because it was bringing that into my environment of my safe space. So I feel like I kind of picked that up from you, and I do appreciate it. Even though, like growing up, it was always this question mark of what does dad do because you would never talk about your job. But now I totally get it. Totally get that.
Yeah, well, and I've seen some policemen make the mistake of going home and try to police their family. You know, and it just makes for very bad uh, home life dynamics. And once again, you just got to learn to take the hat off. You're not a policeman when you're at home. You don't police your neighborhood just because you're off duty. Or you're a cop. You learn how to. When you're off duty, you're off duty, and you learn how to carry yourself um, and be you instead of letting the job define who you are.
Kind of like something you said earlier. You can have a passion for your job, but you don't have to make it your entire life and get like the not that there's anything wrong with them, but one of the things that gets me is when I see people with like the EMS license plates or like the stickers on their car that show that they're an EMS and stuff like that. I can't do that. I got to take my uniform off before I even leave the shift because if I'm driving down the road and somebody sees like if I pass by a wreck and somebody sees me just driving by, that looks bad on me. But also like dude, I'm done. I'm not on shift anymore. I'm not on duty. Like I'm not gonna say I'm gonna let people just die around me, but at the same time, I hope somebody calls 911 because I am not 911 in this moment. So looking back at everything you know now versus when it was first day in the police academy, if you could change it all, would you take the same path and go into law enforcement or would you not?
That's really a very difficult question. Once again, it was a very rewarding career, but it's changed so much, especially in the last 5 to 7 years, 8 years. Um, I see new officers coming on board, and I'm like, man, what are they thinking? It just the liabilities, the scrutiny. It has changed so much. I would like to think that I would, but it's real. I really have, unfortunately, I'm having to second guess whether I would. I know when I applied to become a policeman and I took the state exam for police officer, at the time for the basic training academy, which was the 57th basic training academy back in 1994, there were, I've been told, 300 applicants for police officer that came and showed up and took the exam that were trying to get into an academy. And unfortunately, 5 years ago, Baton Rouge Police Department had an open examination test date, and the state of Louisiana had to cancel the test because they could not find 30 qualified applicants to take the examination for police officer. And I think that really speaks volumes for where law enforcement is today versus where it was 30 years ago, which is alarming because it's a thin blue line. And most people, you've got a little bit of more of a perspective now after a couple of years as a paramedic. But most members of the public, lay people, and the community just really don't fully comprehend how thin the blue line really is. For me personally, I feel like I would do it all over again, but times have changed so much. Knowing what I know, it's now I'm second guessing whether I really truly would.
Fair answer. Appreciate the honesty. Um, we'll go through our last little bit and then close this out. But the craziest or funniest call you've ever had?
That's really a tough question. I mean, you know, there's been so many calls that I've been on, and while you're there, you're thinking you just cannot make this stuff up. You know, everything from a good chicken wing fight to drunks. Drunks were always fun. I did a lot of DWI enforcement. Um, you know, Especially considering some of the areas that I did police work in. Sometimes you think, wow, is this really happening? I guess probably some of the most fun calls were some of the drunks I dealt with. Because although they are violating and driving while intoxicated, it's still a little bit humorous to watch them and interact with them as well. So that's really a tough question, Alexis. I mean, there's been so many different types of calls and so many different scenarios to cherry pick and say which one was actually the funnest. When you do it for so long, you just kind of categorize it. It's either a chicken wing fight or it's you know a domestic, or it's kind of hard to pick one out and say this was the most funniest or whatever. Yeah, and I think that too kind of goes back to what you asked earlier about how do you do this for so long and still not burn out or have compassion fatigue. Well, a lot of it is finding the entertainment value in it as you do it and learn how to laugh. Not laugh at people, but laugh at what people do, and so find the humor in it and keep moving on. I hope I didn't disappoint, but I mean, it's really kind of hard to think of like the one call. I mean, I've seen some funny stuff, and I've seen some, I don't know how long you want story time to go on, but I can, I've seen some pretty whacked up stuff. But it comes with with the territory, and that's what makes law enforcement unique. Is that every call is different. What you do and what you see and respond to, you could go to another major city and it's almost the same. You're just changing the names. It's so diverse in terms of the nature of the calls. That's what makes it interesting.
It's not what I was looking forward to, but it is a fair answer. And it kind of reminds me of something that 2 episodes ago Jacob Davis said. And it was a really good point. He said, I'm serious about my job, but I don't take myself serious. Obviously, he takes his job serious and he studies and he trains and he does all this stuff, but he doesn't take himself so serious that he can't find, kind of like you're talking about, the entertainment value of this job. And Jacob's actually one of the ones that, like, we were going on a call for a drunk, and I was just mad. I was like, man, I don't know why people they can't just drink or they can't just do whatever they want and leave us alone. I don't know why we have to go here. And I'm just getting mad. And he was like, they already did it. He's like, we're just here for a good time at this point. And it's changed my perspective on calls like that, where it's like, all right, well, we're here. Now, I guess, I mean, we're not making fun of anybody, like you said, but it's just, I mean, we're here in this situation.
Yeah. Well, at BRPD, the policy is when a citizen or a complainant makes a call for service, almost unequivocally, a unit has to go out. And I've been on calls where a mother calls the police because her 8-year-old child won't let them turn the TV off. And
Uh-uh.
oh yeah, and so I mean then I've had other calls where you know the child calls the police on the parents because the parents are disciplining the child,
Oh.
and and those I'm like, well, ma'am, do you want to whip them again, and I'll stand by and watch, and so it's just when you're dealing with the public and you're dealing with calls for service and the community, it's a broad net, it's a wide net, and you're going to get a lot of different fish in those nets, and so you just got to you know understand some of these fish are going to be not as bright as others, and you just you got to look at the fish itself and understand the value in it, and but it's still a fish, and so you still got to deal with it accordingly. And But it comes with it comes with a territory, and once again, I've seen some pretty funny stuff, but um, it's kind of hard to cherry pick which one, but getting through it and I guess trying to maintain a level of professionalism. Uh, you just got to learn how to treat people like you want to be treated, and I think that was one thing that kind of defined me in the career that I worked in. Is I want to treat everyone, no matter what level of social status or level of education, level of impairment, so to speak. It doesn't really matter. I still want to treat them like I would want to be treated, or as if they're my own family members. And that kind of defined me as in terms of how I did my job.
What's a piece of advice you give to someone either going into law enforcement or thinking about it, somebody already in it? What would you tell them?
Well, if they're thinking about it, I would tell them run.
That's what you told me one time.
Um, if it's you know it, they'll know within a year or two if it's something they're going to be if they're called into it. I mean, going back to very early in this podcast, law enforcement is something you have to be called into. It's not something you're going to do for the money or uh, it's something you really have to be called into or it's in your blood. And I know for individuals that are considering it, I would tell them get as much education as you can. Uh, Try to work on the federal level where the respect is higher, the pay is greater, and you're working with more professionals versus working as a sheriff deputy in Podunk County and there's you've got two people, the chief and the next guy that's answering calls. So it's once again it's a great career. I think I would never tell somebody not to do it, but I think a lot of your success is going to depend on where you work at, which agency, um, and what level of law enforcement you work at. Once again, I think if somebody's really considering it and they're in high school and college, I'm going to tell them to get as much education as they can. Try to go to the federal level of law enforcement. Really, aim for the highest that they can go, and enjoy the ride.
Very good. Well, do you have anything else to add, Dad?
Um, Not anything that I could think of. I think it was a very good list of questions.
Thank you.
And I've listened to not every episode, but I've listened to a few of them. I think you're doing a great job.
Well, it was an honor to have Lieutenant Fairbanks. I mean, retired Lieutenant Fairbanks on my podcast. Thank you for taking your time, Dad. Thank you for sitting with me, answer my questions. I know there were a lot of them.
Yes,
So,
ma'am.
love you, Dad.
Love you, Lexus.
So, with that, so, guys, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, future topic ideas, please email me at 22 at the lips podcast at gmail.com. Again, that's 22 at the lips podcast at gmail.com. Thanks. Never stop learning and be safe out there, friends. Also, as you talk, make sure that like you can see see how it's a little yellow on the bottom? That's what we're going for.
Yellow.
No, not you can talk closer into the mic, Dad.
Yellow.
Not that close. We're not okay.
Yellow. Yellow.
See? You gotta eat the mic a little bit and enunciate.